Good morning. Welcome to another edition of Coffee and Analytics with your host, me, Nick Pauls. Before we get started on this month's topic, this episode is brought to you by FranCamp. If you haven't found FranCamp yet, go to 1851francamp.com. Here's the intro. It's our first annual. I guess you have to have two annual to make it an annual thing, but it's our first conference here at 1851. We would love for you to be an attendee at it. For those of you who are clients, you attend for free. We wanted to build a conference that didn't gouge you and are grateful to you, our clients, to be a part of it. So get the registration code from your account manager. They'll give you the code to register for free. And then everybody else, we did universal pricing. Suppliers don't pay more than non-clients. We did that to be a disruptor to the industry. So we'd love to have you at FranCamp in September. Really cool lineup. The first speaker that we announced is Chris Chelios, who is a Hall of Famer from the Chicago Blackhawks. It's actually taking place. The event is taking place in the area that I'm sitting in right now, in the Chicago Tribune Tower, right on the river, going Cubs game, lots of cool stuff. And the last thing I'll say on FranCamp is we designed it so that there really isn't speakers. It's more so a collective. Everybody is going to have a voice. And the reality is, I think you go to an IFA or any of these conferences, and you look up on stage and people talk and they talk with you. And then there's some sort of Q&A. And we said, well, wait a second. What is the most valuable thing out of these franchise conferences? Or what do people say are the most valuable things? They talk about roundtables and networking. And so we redesigned this that, yes, there's going to be bring together group moments, much like camp. And then you're going to break into these groups where it doesn't matter if you're a supplier, franchisor, franchisee, broker. The reality is we're all trying to grow in business. As long as that is the unique thing about us, then we all have a voice when it comes to these group breakouts. And we're going to work through what does the final quarter of the year look like, what does success look like, and then setting the tone for 2024. And it's going to be done in a group effort. So it should be a really, really rewarding conference. Again, go to 1851francamp.com to register. We are limiting registration, so make sure you're not late to the game if you want to be a part of the conference. Okay, so this month's Coffee and Analytics is really built around what is franchising. And so I start off the note by saying, think back to a time when you weren't in franchising. Go back to the day before you broke into franchising. And it could be a job led you into it, or your family was in the business, or whatever it was that brought you into franchising. I want you to think about that moment and now answer the question, do you know what franchising is? And so I thought about this, and I can go back to 2000, end of 2004, beginning of 2005, when I'm breaking into it. I think I accepted a job into franchising in 2004. And I would have said franchising is McDonald's, or franchising's the Major League Baseball or NBA or NFL. That was my understanding of franchising. I would imagine most have that same experience. I remember I was on a committee at the International Franchise Association where it was all about education of what is franchising. And it started off with a survey where IFA hired a firm to do a survey of the general public on what is franchising. And most thought that the owner of the business was an employee. They thought that they made all the money. I mean, it was all these weird statements. And so I can go back to that moment. I can think back to when I first broke into franchising, and I can say I was a novice. I knew nothing. I knew nothing of what this thing actually was. And so now let's flash forward to a candidate, someone that's out in the world right now. They're in their career. They're thinking about buying a franchise, and they say, okay, I'm interested in understanding what franchising is. They might think it's licensing. And so what they do is they find a brand or a franchise broker consultant, and they land into this website. And on the website, all of these franchise websites, it's like, look how much money you can make, or look at how great our product is, or look how large the category is. And it got me thinking, we need to look backwards at the data that these franchisees that we've spoken with beyond their buying process about what it was. And we need to understand, like, were they hitting this hurdle of what franchising is? And so it started swinging my brain, as it usually does, to a place. I said, what is the area of opportunity for the franchise industry when it comes to answering this question? What is franchising? And so I pulled up the biggest franchisor websites, and then I pulled up some emerging franchisor websites, and zero had anything that explained what franchising is. And so if you've read my note, I'll tell you the three points that I made. I said, for me, I knew franchising was McDonald's, but I wasn't exactly sure what that meant. Some things I may have not understood, that as a franchisee, my dollar is worth 90 cents, that this is a big deal as this dips into profitability. Doesn't necessarily hurt it, just means I have to hustle a little bit more to make up that 10% or that 10 cents per dollar that I pay in royalties. That there's brand restrictions. I can't say, hey, McDonald's, we're going to change the logo to purple. I mean, maybe we can because it's Grimace's birthday. But the point is, there's restrictions. And so you have to work within the parameters. And frankly, when you're paying these franchise fees and these royalties, you should want to work within the parameters of what are the restrictions of that franchisor. And then what is franchisee support? And I wrote in my note that I've told this story many times. Very early on, this would have been probably 2006, at the beginning of 2006. I think Hurricane Katrina was 2005, if I have this right. Hurricane Katrina hits, and one of our clients, I was very excited about the prospect of becoming a franchise owner with their brand. I had a group of friends that we pieced together, and they're the ones that are going through the discovery process. I'm kind of advising on the outside, and I hadn't told the client that I'm actually a part of this group that has inquired and is going through the process. And I asked the franchisor, I said, hey, you have this franchisee in New Orleans who got demolished, 10 locations. Are you going to support them? And the franchisor, our contact, said, Nick, that's the beauty of franchising. When something happens to the franchisee, you're not responsible for it. You're not liable for it. They are. It's on them. And I remember that exact moment. I can tell you the color of the phone, even though most phones probably look the same way. I remember being on that phone. I'm like, that's different. Now, I don't think every franchisor behaves that way, but it gave me this pause as I'm trying to learn what is franchising and what falls on me from a responsibility standpoint. So I start that because I think it's important to set the tone of what is franchising as a part of the process, similar to a career, a home, a restaurant, like a restaurant you walk in, or let's say you're walking the street and you walk in and it says Nick's. There's no descriptor on what the restaurant is. You probably walk up to that front door and there's that menu on the wall in a frame or on a banister or something. And you look at the menu to understand what is that business. Yet again, in franchising, we don't do that. So I use my perceptions of what was franchising, how I was educating myself in the early stages to say, if IFA did the research and people don't understand what franchising is, if I didn't know it as a smart-ish individual at the time, and if all of you look back to that moment and say, your moment of getting franchising, all of you are incredibly intelligent. Did you understand what it was? And we have a consensus that we didn't or we don't, then there's an opportunity that's not about how much you can make as the first message. It's about, let's educate the franchisee, if they choose to, on what is franchising. And so I'll tell you the headline at the end is that we're going to start building these into the websites that we build to make sure that we're educating the buyer on what it actually is. And so what I did this month for Coffee and Analytics, I went back and I said, all right, well, let's see what our franchisees said when we said, what is the one thing you wish you knew about franchising going into it? And so here are the bullet points. There are a lot of ins and outs that we had to learn in the process of owning one. The first couple of years, there were a lot of rough patches that we had to fix. But once you get it all smooth with corporate, everything is good. There are a lot of things that you won't understand until you actually own a location and go through it. So if we have to strip through what are they saying? Well, profitability maybe doesn't happen on day one. And so I take that insight and I start thinking about broker education, consultant education, and the process of buying a franchise. And what are we educating these candidates about on how long it takes? And I get it. It's the easiest pathway. The why you why now is very easy when you talk about money. But money takes time to build. And I'm not sure we dive enough into how long it takes for profitability. And it's hard. I get it. It's really, really hard because if your competitors are flashing these big fancy numbers of how much money you can make, and you're like, we're going to take an honest approach and say, like, look, first year sales is going to be tough. Year 2, it's going to get better. And year 3, it's going to get really good. So when you start thinking about scaling as a franchisee, you're going to be in a really, really solid place. But apples to apples, if you're selling against numbers, it's really hard to educate your buyer on how long the process takes. I can think back to another early franchisee. We actually had a TV segment in New York with him. He was a former NFL player. He lived in Atlanta. He bought into a sports restaurant franchise. And so it was exciting. There was an athlete. Athletes are excited. And me and this athlete, we went and had dinner the night before the segment. I thought it was really cool. He actually had an NFL player's card that got us into the restaurant. So I was enamored by that. And he talked about his NFL career and how he built up some money, and that's why he fell into franchising. Loved the story. What was interesting, though, he closed less than 12 months into this thing. And so I think about what was the disconnect. He was very excited with the prospect of owning a sports bar, probably wasn't judged carefully enough on whether he could lead a team to do the business, and then also didn't look at the total capital that went into it. And the franchisor was super excited because here you have an NFL player who's saying, I want in. And so are you qualifying the right way along that? Not the point. The point is, are we educating the buyer throughout it? It's not just qualifying, it's educating. And so if we would have educated this NFL player to say, like, here's how much money you really need, here's what your expectations are going to be for year 1, and then here's how franchising works. You want to make incredible wealth, you're going to have to build scale. And what would have happened if we given those 3 bullet points on top of here's how franchising works? Does that franchisee, does that NFL player buy into the franchise? Maybe they're still passionate, they really want to go, but you've equipped them the right way with what is franchising, so that when they hit these bumps or this turbulence, or what this first bullet point said of, once I smooth things over with corporate, I was good, maybe that helps solve it. Bullet point number 2, a lot of training is needed. Well, this is also skipped over quite a bit. And when I'm evaluating FDDs, this is actually a critique back to the franchisor. At some point in history, we got this all wrong. We started thinking that the franchise fee is where we make money. Yet the money that we make as a franchisor is completely built around royalty. And so if we said, if the question at hand is, how can we drive the most amount of royalty off of a franchisee, and we work backwards from this, and we start thinking through what should this process be, then we start running into some areas of opportunity. And so let's be clear, if we're making a lot of money off royalty, that means our franchisees are also making a lot of money because we make it on scale. And so we go all the way back to the beginning stages of qualifying a franchisee. If we qualify them that they can barely open one unit or can open up one comfortably, but then is really going to have to print some cash to get to number two, then ultimately the odds of us making a lot of money off that franchisee diminish. Versus if we qualify the candidate, let's say we look at their financials to say, can you open up 3 of these or 2 of these? Now at least we're looking at the financial health of that candidate in a little bit of a different way, so that when they join our system, they're going to scale, drive more revenue. And if they open up 2 units, let's say each at $500,000, now we're making money off of $1 million a year royalty versus a half. And so you take a franchisee that can only open up one, there's going to be limitations on how far they can go. And frankly, and I really do mean this, I think the amount of work that's going to go back into supporting the franchisee is going to be quite significant. And so your work doesn't increase that much when you have a scaling franchisee. And so you go all the way back to the beginning. And the question at hand is, how do we maximize the royalty? Well, did we educate that buyer on scale and business planning? And when they came in, are we holding their feet to the fire on what they need to do to accomplish whatever goal or outcome that they want out of becoming a franchisee? And so there's all these things that are missed in that process that ultimately hurt the franchisor in the end, because the amount of money that comes off of royalty is not as high as the potential could be. And now you go all the way back to the big thing, and this is what this franchisee said, that it's going to require a lot of training. I would say it should require more. Because if you think of a franchisee, on day one, they buy into a franchise, and most of the time they have a skill set very defined into sales, into marketing, into ops, as executive leader, whatever it is. And then you say, hey, franchisee, now you need to be an expert in HR and labor relations and marketing and people management and supply chain management and waste management. I mean, there's so many different elements that they get thrown into. And for an entrepreneur, entrepreneurs are nutso, me included. So we don't see the messes. We just kind of jump in and start learning it. But for a franchisee who is not an entrepreneur, they're entrepreneurial and need to follow a system, it's very intimidating. And so you think about how much more can we give them in training or educate how training works or support to make sure that ultimately the outcome that we're trying to drive is significant amount of royalty. And so you think about it, reinvestment into franchisees. I love the franchisors that are like, let's try not to make 1 penny on franchisees' first unit or first and second unit. Because if we invest all of that money that we make off that franchisee into supporting them and driving their revenues, then ultimately the amount of money that we're going to make when they get to unit 3 is going to be so significant that we're going to be really excited and pumped up on the amount of money that will come out of them from a royalty standpoint. Bullet point number 3, that we won't be doing it alone. The team is super supportive in each and every aspect of the process, finding good real estate, a good marketing team, etc., helping us out and setting up our vendor accounts. They also provide the materials, learning about the franchise. And so what I'm hearing there is, well, wait a second, the franchisor didn't even educate enough or take enough credit for how much depth of what is franchising, how they use franchising, and how they support franchisees. And they didn't take credit for it in the sales process. And the franchisee is blown away by this. And they're like, wow, you really had my back. And so you really need to define it. Support is not 8 bullet points that go on a website. Support could actually be you asking a franchisee, tell us how our support works. I think the more that you use franchisees or your system to validate the business, the more assets that you can use to actually educate franchisees on what franchising is. I just wish we had spoken to the corporate team sooner so that we can make the decision earlier. Now, that's not an education of what is franchising. That's probably an education of the process. But that one's also an insight that the corporate team was too far removed from the process, or the broker didn't make the connection fast enough in the process to lift the candidate up. And so again, like, where do I have interaction with corporate team? Even if it's in the form of video like this, like, the reality is, even if I've never even if I've never spoken with you, I better be able to speak, maybe a little bit more coffee. Even if I've never spoken with you before, at least you're seeing this interaction on this video of me trying to give you some insights on how to win at franchising. And that's going to create some sort of perception for you on what my personality is, on how much I want to give you for no cost. And then later on, if we work together, you're going to hopefully see more value in the organization that we've built, that we can actually give you something in return. And so the same is true on your sales process, that maybe the insight there is maybe a Q&A with your ops team on what is franchising, maybe a Q&A with your CEO on what is franchising, or even like this, talking about all the things that you've learned about becoming a franchisor in the process of becoming one. It is a whole lot of work to run a business, and you may be surprised by what is required in the day-to-day operations of the business. We all see it from the front counter, but you need to know what goes on in the back of the house. You need to have a good handle on both the business side and the operation side. Great point. And that goes back to like the complexities of operating a franchise, and being okay with disclosing it with the objective of getting franchisees in who can scale, who will ultimately drive more revenue to you through the form of royalty. And so some of that education form on the beginning on how much time do you have to put into this is a good piece of information. Again, I keep going back to this. I get it. Like, sales teams are conditioned to sell because, one, most of the time there's a CEO or founder that is like, go get me more franchises. Where are my leads? Get me more franchises, versus saying, guys, let's get more royalty and let's build and cultivate the right culture of people who want to scale. And both of those messages are most of the time misaligned. And therefore, if your task as a salesperson to go sell franchises, then you don't necessarily care as much about the royalty. You care about selling franchises because that's what keeps your job. And so, like, there's plenty of insights here on what is backwards about franchising. But if it were me, you educate the buyer as much as humanly possible to eliminate some of those risks of what is winning and what is not, or how this works and how it doesn't, so that when they're in this, they are truly in this and they want to be part of your family for a very long period of time. I wish I had known to follow systems rather than trying to think of ways to do things differently. Yes. I mean, I keep pressuring franchisees on this point, but when you spend the franchise fee that you're going to spend, and you pay the royalty that you're going to pay, and you pay a tech fee and whatever else, why in the world would you try to do things differently? That is completely backwards to me. You've spent the money to buy something and you try to do it differently. Probably the easiest example that comes into my brain is, imagine buying a piece of furniture from IKEA and thinking you know how to put it together better than IKEA, especially those like little knobs. I'm not a handyman. Little knobs where you got to put the nail in, then you twist it, and then it locks in place. Like, imagine doing that. Or the pegs, you missed the pegs in there. I mean, that creates a disaster. And so that piece of furniture falls down and it doesn't look as good as it did in store at IKEA. Same is true with a business that you've paid to operate. Why in the world would you throw away the asset that you've spent so much money on? It's a lot of hard work at the beginning. I have worked 12+ hour days. There's a lot you need to learn and you have to give 100%. Yeah. There is no such thing as a free lunch. Money doesn't grow on trees. You can't get rich quick. I mean, all of the sayings are true when it comes to business. It is hard. It is a lot of work. Yes, there are some businesses that are lifestyle businesses, and time is money and time is currency, and it's the most valuable commodity that we have. But owning a business is a ton of work. And if you're buying into it, not willing to put in 100%, then you kind of get the outcomes that you expect. And so the next thing that I did in this note is I said, okay, now you take all these things. What is the general insights of how does franchising work? What is franchising? And now you start saying, like, can we put this to work in our sales process? So on your website, is there some sort of piece, a general what is franchising section on your website? Most likely no. Add that. Do you have a general what is franchising white paper, especially relates back to your business? And a white paper could be a fancy term, an article. Write out your thoughts on what is franchising, what you've learned. Even just posting that on LinkedIn has value. Then as a part of your sales process, candidate comes in, do you have a general what is franchising email campaign for nurturing the candidates so that you can educate them on what franchising is? The point of all of this is, again, if we go backwards to the time when we were first entering franchising, did we have any idea on what it was that we know it is today? Probably not. And so that's a big insight, because you sitting where you sit today, even if you go to conferences or events or things today, and you walk away saying, wow, I learned something new. And that's with you being in franchising. Now, put yourself in the shoes of someone who's not in franchising. They have no idea what this is. And so, again, with my hope of this month's Coffee and Analytics is to, one, get your brain thinking about how do we educate the buyers on what franchising is, give them tools in our voice, not in a broker's voice, consultant's voice, or even Nick Powell's voice, in your guys' voice. What is franchising? Give them that asset. And then two, in exchange for being honest, having integrity and transparency to the candidate in the buying process, the hope is that you'll bring on better franchisees who can scale. Imagine a world where you want 25 deals, your next 25 deals. And you said, I'm going to change my mindset. I'm going to just get 5 franchisees who can open up 25. And I don't care if that takes a year or 2 years or 3 years. I'm going to get hyper dialed in on finding 5 franchisees who I'm educating what franchising is. I'm setting the right expectations. I'm qualifying them from the right financial standpoint. I'm supporting them in a way that no franchisor has ever supported a franchisee. And I'm super dialed in to driving their revenues, because in exchange for driving their revenues, it drives mine. What happens? You build a great business that will continue to scale. So it's not about leads anymore. It's about deals. And it's not about single unit deals. It's about scaling deals. And it's about the right people into your organization that when they jump into this thing, they say, you know what I love most about you? Is you were honest, transparent, and you educated me on everything that you felt I needed to know about franchising before I jumped into this. And hopefully that gives you some sort of takeaway from this month's Coffee and Analytics that you can hold on to and impact your brand growth. Again, if you've made it this far, here we got a great attendee. Look at that. I love this functionality. Looking forward to meeting you at Frank Camp. If you have not registered, would love to have you at Frank Camp. 1851frankcamp.com. Register. You'll have a voice. You could have been in franchising for one day, and you're still going to have a valuable voice back to what we're trying to accomplish as a group in this session. It'll be the best money that you could possibly spend, even the consultancy alone. Forget about the Cubs game or Chris Chelios or all the other cool things that we're going to be doing. You'll get great value out of being a part of this, and hopefully set your tone for what you can do moving forward within franchising. This is the July version of Coffee and Analytics. I'm your host, Nick Powell. Thank you for spending some time with us, watching this, and hopefully learning on how franchising can work better for you.